The yellow glow from the house poured out onto the neat suburban lawn, where a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the noise and flashing lights. Emily, her simple maternity dress clinging to her in the cool night air, shuffled up the walkway, one hand supporting her lower back, the other clenching a wrinkled hospital envelope. Her breath hitched as she saw her home. Her home, alive with music, laughter, and faces she didn't recognize. Her heart raced. She moved closer, knocking on the front door with trembling fingers. Inside, through the wide living room window, Emily caught sight of Sabrina, lounging casually on the sofa. Sabrina wore Emily's own silk robe, her hair spilling over her shoulders as she threw her head back in laughter. Travis, Emily's husband, leaned against the fireplace, a beer bottle dangling from his fingers, laughing along. Someone turned, the music up louder, almost drowning out Emily's frantic knocks. She pounded harder, the sound desperate now, but no one moved to open the door. A window slid open upstairs. Travis leaned out, his grin sharp under the porch light. "You don't belong here anymore," he shouted, and a fresh wave of laughter erupted from inside. Gasps rippled through the small group of neighbors across the street, their whispers carrying on the breeze. Emily's throat tightened as she pressed her hand protectively over her swollen belly. She tried again, her voice breaking. "Travis, please. I just need to get my things." Instead of sympathy, a paper cup, still half filled, with some sticky sweet drink, came flying out from the open doorway, splattering against the porch at Emily's feet. More laughter. Emily flinched but stayed standing, blinking rapidly as tears filled her eyes. She wiped them away fiercely, refusing to let them fall. Across the street, an old woman in a faded sweater rocked slowly in a wooden chair. Mrs. Alden, one of the neighborhood's longest residents, watched without a word, her knitting forgotten in her lap. Her gaze was steady, sad, and unlike the others, she didn't look away when Emily's eyes briefly met hers. The music inside the house swelled again, and Sabrina appeared at the front window. She lifted her champagne glass in a mock toast, then leaned forward to blow Emily a mocking kiss before pulling the curtain shut with a dramatic flourish. The house disappeared behind heavy velvet. For a moment, everything stood still. Emily stood there on the front step, her shoulders heaving, as she struggled to control her breathing, her free hand clenched tightly into a fist, nails digging into her palm. No one came out. No one opened the door. No one cared. The murmuring crowd shifted uneasily, some glancing away, pretending not to have seen. A few whispered among themselves, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. No one stepped forward to help her. No one dared. Emily finally took a slow step back. Her shoes scraped against the concrete as she turned, gathering what remained of her dignity. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly again, cradling it like a shield against the cruelty around her. Head held as high as she could manage, she walked down the driveway without looking back. Her figure was small and fragile under the harsh glow of the streetlights, every step a silent scream. Mrs. Alden rose slowly from her chair, standing on her porch as Emily passed. For a brief moment, Emily looked up, and though no words were exchanged, the soft, understanding look in the old woman's eyes gave her the slightest anchor against the overwhelming humiliation. It wasn't much, but it was something. Behind her, the door slammed shut. The music inside the house grew louder, the laughter sharper, more vicious. The sound followed Emily down the street, echoing in the empty spaces between the houses. She walked past trimmed hedges and manicured lawns, places where she had once been invited for barbecues and baby showers. Now, no one waved. No one called her name. She crossed the street, her steps slow but determined, and disappeared into the shadows beyond the reach of the porch lights. Behind a curtain, Mrs. Alden watched her go, her wrinkled hand resting against the cool glass. At the window upstairs, Sabrina peeled the curtain back once more, just long enough to watch Emily disappear down the sidewalk. A cruel smirk twisted her lips. She leaned against Travis's shoulder, her laugh muffled against his chest. Inside, the party roared on. Outside, the night swallowed Emily whole, her silhouette growing smaller with every step until there was nothing left but the faint tapping of her shoes against the pavement. And then, silence. The fluorescent lights of the small roadside diner buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow over the handful of late-night customers hunched over their coffee cups. Emily slid into a booth near the back, her jacket clutched tightly around her belly. The fabric of the seat stuck slightly to her skin, but she didn't move. She just sat there, motionless, staring down at the menu she couldn't afford to open. Her feet ached. Her back throbbed. Her mind felt like a hollow drum, empty, except for the heavy pounding of humiliation that refused to fade. A young waitress, no older than 20, approached cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gaze lingered on Emily's swollen stomach, on the sagging lines around her mouth that shouldn't have been there at her age. "Hey, hun," the girl said gently, setting a chipped coffee mug down on the table. "On the house, all right? You look like you could use something warm." Emily tried to protest, but the words caught in her throat. She nodded instead, wrapping her cold fingers around the cup like it was a lifeline. Her phone buzzed against the tabletop. Emily jumped a little, heart hammering against her ribs. She flipped it over to see a notification flashing. New update from Travis Carter. With trembling hands, she opened the link. A photo filled the screen. Sabrina, smirking triumphantly, holding Emily's wedding ring up to the camera. Behind her, in Emily's living room, Travis raised a glass in a silent toast. The caption read, "Finally, where I belong." The words blurred as Emily's vision swam with tears. She bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. Her hands, reddened and cracked from the cold, fumbled to dial Travis's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before his voice answered, casual and unbothered. "What do you want?" he drawled. I just need a place to stay for the night." "Please, Travis," Emily whispered, her voice cracking. She could hear the clinking of glasses and muted laughter in the background. "You need to get used to sleeping outside, Em. That's your life now," he said. And before she could respond, the line went dead. The cup slipped from her fingers, coffee sloshing over the edge and pooling on the table. Emily clutched at the edge of the booth, her chest heaving as a wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled to her feet, ignoring the concerned looks from the few patrons scattered around the diner, and made her way toward the restroom, her body moving on pure instinct. Inside the restroom, the bright lights were merciless. Emily barely made it to the sink before her legs gave out. She collapsed hard against the floor, her head striking the tile with a dull thud. Pain ricocheted through her body, but worse was the tight, pulling sensation that seized her belly, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She gasped, clawing weakly at the floor, fear slicing through the fog in her mind. Someone was shouting. Footsteps pounded against the tile. Hands, many hands, lifted her gently, voices blurring together. "Call 911!" someone yelled. The last thing Emily saw before her world went dark was the young waitress kneeling beside her, her face pale and stricken. The ambulance's siren screamed through the night as it tore down the highway, lights flashing red against the dark buildings. Inside, Emily lay strapped to a stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed over her mouth and nose. The paramedics spoke in low, urgent tones she couldn't understand, their hands moving quickly over her body. The world tilted and spun, every bump in the road sending new jolts of pain through her. At the hospital, Emily was rushed through the emergency doors. The sterile smell, the blinding white lights, the cold metal of the gurney. Everything felt distant, unreal. A doctor hovered above her, his voice cutting through the haze. "We need to stabilize her. She's showing signs of preterm labor." Mrs. Alden sat quietly in the corner of the waiting room, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had followed the ambulance in her battered station wagon, keeping a respectful distance. When the receptionist called Emily's name and asked for insurance information, and Emily, barely conscious, couldn't respond, Mrs. Alden rose from her seat and approached the counter without a word. She pulled a worn leather wallet from her bag and slid a credit card across the desk. "Put it on this," she said simply. Hours later, Emily stirred in a hospital bed, the rhythmic beep of monitors the only sound in the dim room. An IV dripped steadily into her arm. Her body ached, her mind foggy, but she could feel the small, reassuring kicks of life inside her belly. Relief so deep it hurt flooded her chest. The door creaked open, and a doctor stepped inside, flipping through a chart. He was middle-aged, kind-faced, and spoke with a measured calm that somehow cut through Emily's fear. He approached the bed, setting the clipboard aside. "You're stable," he said, "but you need to be very careful from now on. Stress like this." He paused, meeting her eyes seriously. "It could endanger the baby." Emily swallowed hard, nodding. Her throat burned from holding back the sobs that threatened to break loose. She turned her head slightly, gazing out the narrow hospital window at the faint hint of dawn creeping into the sky. Somewhere, deep inside her, something shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a silent, raw determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. The bell above the grocery store door jingled weakly as Emily pushed it open, stepping onto the cracked linoleum floor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old produce. Her uniform hung awkwardly over her swollen belly, the seams pulling tight whenever she bent to stock the lower shelves. She moved carefully, trying not to attract attention. The job barely paid minimum wage, but it was the only place that had agreed to hire her without questions. And at this point, survival didn't leave room for pride. The store was always cold, the heating system barely working, and the constant buzz of fluorescent lights made her temples throb. Emily spent most of her shifts hauling boxes, wiping down sticky counters, and facing customers who either looked through her or pitied her. Every minute was a quiet battle, her body protesting every task. But she pressed on, hour after hour, because she had no choice. She was restocking canned goods near the front when the air around her shifted, the kind of stillness that always came before something bad. Emily straightened up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and froze. Travis and Sabrina had walked in, arms linked, the bell above the door still swinging. Sabrina wore a fitted designer coat and oversized sunglasses despite the dim light. Her hand perched delicately on Travis's arm, flashing a diamond ring so large it caught the light with every slight movement. Emily turned quickly, hoping to disappear down an aisle, but it was too late. Sabrina's voice, sweet as poison, carried across the store. "Oh, look, Travis. It's our little bag girl. Still trying to stay relevant, huh?" A few customers glanced over, curiosity flickering across their faces. Emily kept her back turned, hands shaking as she tried to arrange cans in a straight line. She willed herself to breathe normally, to keep her head down and survive another few minutes without collapsing. Travis chuckled, loud and mocking. "Guess some people are just allergic to success." Sabrina slipped her arm from his and sauntered closer to Emily, tapping her ring on a nearby shelf with a hollow clinking sound. "You recognize this?" she purred, waving her hand in front of Emily's face. "Upgraded. Travis always said you never made anything sparkle." Heat rose in Emily's cheeks, and her vision blurred for a moment. She forced herself to focus on the task, her fingers fumbling with the labels. The pain wasn't just emotional. Anymore. It was physical. A burning knot of shame lodged somewhere between her chest and throat. The store manager, a stocky man with thinning hair, hurried over, rubbing his hands nervously. His eyes darted between Sabrina's expensive coat, Travis's smug smile, and Emily's flushed, humiliated face. "Emily, maybe you should take your break outside," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "We can't have drama in front of customers." For a second, Emily thought she might actually collapse from the weight of it all, but she just nodded, setting down the can she was holding, and walked stiffly toward the back room, every step feeling like she was dragging 1,000 pounds behind her. She didn't look at Travis. She didn't look at Sabrina. She didn't look at anyone. Behind the swinging door, in the cramped employee locker area, Emily sat on a plastic chair, pressing her forehead against the cold metal of her locker. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the echo of their laughter, still ringing in her ears. When she opened the locker to grab her purse, a small white envelope tumbled out and landed at her feet. Emily picked it up, frowning. There was no name on it, just a grocery store gift card tucked inside, along with a receipt that showed it had been purchased earlier that morning. She looked around, but no one was there. Somehow she knew. Mrs. Alden. Again. Always quietly watching. Always quietly helping. Never asking for thanks. A lump rose in Emily's throat, but she swallowed it down, gently slipping the card into her purse without a word. Her shift ended late that evening, and the walk back to the tiny room she rented was cold and long. Emily wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her feet aching with every step. The streets blurred past her, the neon signs and flashing traffic lights painting streaks of red and blue across the sidewalk. The world felt like a different planet, now, hostile and uncaring. Her phone vibrated against her hip as she trudged up the cracked stairs to her door. She fished it out, expecting another taunt or a bill she couldn't pay. But the screen showed an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" Her voice cracked from exhaustion. "Is this Emily Carter?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Bennett and Moore Law Offices. We've been trying to reach you regarding an outstanding matter related to your late mother's estate." Emily gripped the railing tighter, her heart thudding painfully. What? "There appears to be a property asset in your name that was never transferred after her passing. It's still legally yours, pending a few formalities. We'd like you to come in to discuss it." Emily blinked hard, her mind struggling to process the words. Property? She had nothing. She had less than nothing. Yet the voice was polite, professional, real. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, something shifted inside her. Not hope exactly, but something close. A flicker. She murmured, "A thank you," and ended the call. Standing there in the dimly lit hallway, the peeling paint and musty carpet around her suddenly feeling a little less suffocating. She pressed a hand against her belly, feeling the small, stubborn kicks of life inside her and whispered, "We're going to be okay. Somehow." Down the block, in the same battered sweater, Mrs. Alden stood at her window, watching quietly as Emily closed her door behind her. The law office sat quietly on the edge of downtown, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a forgotten dry cleaner. The windows were dusty, the awning faded, but inside, it smelled like old paper and something faintly comforting. Emily sat stiffly on a worn leather chair, her hands clasped tightly around her purse strap, her belly nudging against the desk whenever she shifted nervously. Across from her, Mr. Halpern, a thin man in a gray cardigan with kind eyes, leafed through a stack of old files. "I remember your mother well," he said gently, glancing up at her. "She was smart. Tough, too. She made sure you'd be protected, even if you didn't know it." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She watched as he pulled out a thin folder, laying it carefully on the desk between them. Inside was a deed, the edges yellowed, but the names were clear. Her mother's. And hers. "This," he said, tapping the paper lightly. is half ownership of a property downtown. A small commercial building. Your mother invested in it before she passed. It's been generating minor rental income. But no one's touched it in years. It's still legally in your name. Emily stared at the document, the letters swimming before her eyes. She hadn't known. No one had told her. She had spent so long feeling like she had nothing. Less than nothing. And now, this. Mr. Halpern continued, his voice calm but firm. Given your current situation, Emily, this could change everything for you. But you'll have to assert your ownership formally, file the necessary paperwork. Travis. He hesitated, then pushed a second folder across the desk. He filed a counterclaim. His new lawyer is aggressive. They're trying to tie the property into your marriage assets, saying, you owe him half. Emily swallowed hard, her fingers curling tighter around the purse strap. The thought of another court battle, more public humiliation, twisted her stomach into knots. She could almost hear Travis's mocking laughter in her head, see Sabrina's smug smile as they dragged her name through the mud again. You have every right to fight this, Mr. Halpern said quietly. And you can win. But it won't be easy. It'll be loud and messy and cruel. You need to decide if you're ready for that. Emily let her gaze fall to the document again. Her name was right there, clear as day. Not Travis's, not anyone else's, just hers. For a long moment, she didn't move. The room around her felt too big, too empty, like it might swallow her, whole if she made the wrong choice. Then, without speaking, Emily reached for the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name neatly, the letters steady, each stroke a quiet declaration of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Ownership, not just over a building, but over her own life. Mr. Halpern nodded once, approvingly. We'll file today, he said simply. No fanfare, no false promises, just a path forward, paved in real tangible steps. The afternoon sunlight was harsh as Emily stepped out of the office, the city noises buzzing faintly around her. She pulled her jacket tighter around her belly and walked with slow, deliberate steps back toward the small room she rented. Her body was tired, but inside, something new had begun to settle. A quiet, stubborn fire. At her building, Mrs. Alden sat on the stoop, a cloth grocery bag at her feet. She was knitting again, her needles clicking softly in the warm air. When she spotted Emily, she didn't smile or call out. She simply nodded once. A silent acknowledgement, a kind of unspoken respect. Inside her cramped room, Emily began packing. She didn't have much. Borrowed clothes folded neatly into a second-hand suitcase, a few baby supplies from thrift stores, a tattered book her mother had once read to her as a child. Each item was placed carefully, deliberately, without ceremony. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was moving forward. The mattress sagged as she knelt beside it, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside were the few papers she had managed to hold on to, a worn photograph of her mother, her birth certificate, a faded sonogram picture she had clutched through every sleepless night. She placed the box gently on top of her clothes and zipped. The suitcase shut. There was no music, no triumphant swell of violins, just the soft, steady click of the zipper closing, the metallic snick of the lock sliding into place. Mrs. Alden watched from her window as Emily emerged, suitcase in hand. She didn't offer help, didn't rush to embrace her. She simply stood, there, her thin hand pressed against the glass, bearing silent witness to the moment. Emily paused at the curb, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalk. She shifted her weight, adjusting the suitcase handle, then took a breath. A slow, steady breath that filled her chest with something sturdier than fear. She didn't look back as she walked down the street, her steps measured and sure. Each movement spoke louder than any words could have. She wasn't chasing the life she lost. She was building a new one, brick by stubborn brick. At the corner, her phone buzzed again. A new message from Mr. Halpern confirming the paperwork had been filed successfully. The first step was done. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was hers. It was real. Emily tucked the phone into her jacket pocket, adjusted the suitcase once more, and kept walking, the city stretching out before her, raw and indifferent, and full of possibility. The afternoon sun gleamed against the freshly cleaned glass of the downtown building, the polished floors inside reflecting the rows of brand-new storefronts. A small crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the buzz of the grand reopening. Ribbons fluttered from the awnings, and cameras flashed as city officials shook hands and smiled for photographs. In the center of it all stood Emily, her simple navy dress clinging softly to her figure, her hands calmly resting on her stomach where her baby shifted quietly inside her. Her chin lifted slightly as a city councilman handed her a ceremonial plaque with her name engraved at the bottom. From across the street, Travis and Sabrina lingered in the shadows, their clothes wrinkled, their faces tight with desperation. Their fortunes had changed fast. Travis's reckless spending had drained the accounts dry, and the eviction notice nailed to their rented mansion's front door had been the final blow. Now, clinging to the last scraps of their pride, they had come searching for help, completely unaware of who they were about to face. Sabrina tugged on Travis's arm, pointing to a storefront halfway down the row. "That's my boutique," she whispered urgently, her heels clicking faster against the sidewalk. "I need to speak to whoever owns this place. Maybe they'll cut me a break." They pushed their way toward the entrance, brushing past photographers and local business owners. Sabrina straightened her jacket, plastering a sweet smile across her face as she approached the temporary information desk. Before she could say anything, Emily stepped into her path, her presence stopping them cold. For a second, Travis didn't recognize her. She wasn't the woman he'd mocked outside their home months ago. She stood taller now, her eyes clear and unflinching, her every movement radiating a quiet authority that made Sabrina shrink back instinctively. "Emily?" Travis stammered, disbelief coloring his voice. Emily regarded them coolly, her hands steady, at her sides. The cameras turned their way, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Reporters lifted their microphones, ready to catch every word. Without raising her voice, Emily pulled a folded letter from the side of her purse and held it out toward them. "Formal notice to vacate," she said, her tone clipped but calm. "You have 7 days." Sabrina's face crumpled in confusion. "Vacate? But this boutique, this is my store." Emily didn't flinch. "It's located inside property I own now, and your lease is terminated for non-payment." She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stood her ground, letting the reality settle heavily between them. Travis stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Come on, Emily. Be reasonable. You wouldn't leave us out on the street." "You left me there," Emily said quietly, her words slicing cleaner than any shout ever could. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed closer. Sabrina looked around frantically, realizing that not only were they losing the boutique, but they were losing the narrative too. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, and many of them were nodding. Mrs. Alden stood near the edge of the crowd, her knitted shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. She watched the scene unfold without expression, but when Emily met her eyes briefly across the distance, the old woman gave a single small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that meant everything and nothing at once. Sabrina's voice rose in panic, shrill and brittle. "You can't do this to us. You're nothing but a charity case with a sob story." Emily remained still, letting the words hang in the air. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. Around them, people were already drawing their own conclusions, their gazes hardening against Sabrina's outburst. A local reporter stepped forward, thrusting a microphone toward Emily. "Ms. Carter, can you comment on how it feels to be standing here today after everything you've been through?" Emily exhaled slowly, gathering herself. She turned slightly, so the cameras caught her profile, strong and unbowed. "I'm just reclaiming what was already mine," she said simply. "Sometimes when people try to erase you, the best answer is to build something they can never touch." The applause started quietly, from somewhere in the back, and then it spread. It wasn't loud or theatrical, but it was real. Emily blinked hard against the sudden sting behind her eyes, but didn't let a single tear fall. Behind her, a new tenant of the mini-mall, the owner of a small bookstore, stepped forward, offering her a congratulatory handshake. More followed. A bakery owner, a craft shop manager, a young woman opening a cafe. Each one looked at Emily with real respect, seeing not a victim, but the force that had made this opportunity possible. Travis and Sabrina stood frozen in the center of it all, their world crumbling quietly around them. Without another word, they turned and fled down the street, Sabrina's expensive heels clattering loudly on the concrete, Travis trailing behind her with his head down. Reporters surged around Emily, snapping photos, shouting questions. A young journalist squeezed through the crowd and held out a microphone, her voice breathless with excitement. "How does it feel to rise after so much betrayal?" Emily smiled then. A real, quiet smile that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She didn't answer with dramatic words. She simply turned back toward the building, her future unfolding behind glass windows and open doors, and kept moving forward. Mrs. Alden, standing by the curb, smiled too, a small, proud tilt of her head as she watched Emily disappear into the crowd, not as a tragedy, but as the woman who had taken back her life in full view of the world. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of whispered conversations and shuffling papers. Every seat was filled. Journalists, curious locals, even a few former friends of Travis who had once laughed at Emily's expense now sat hunched in the back rows, pretending not to be invested. The bailiff called for order as the judge entered, his black robe billowing slightly as he took his seat behind the massive oak bench. Emily sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm and composed despite the tight coil of nerves winding inside her. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, no dramatic makeup or theatrics, just quiet, solid presence. Across from her, Travis slumped in his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face pale. Sabrina sat beside him, her hands twisting, a tissue into shreds, mascara already smudging beneath her eyes. Neither of them looked confident anymore. They looked cornered. The judge wasted no time. He motioned to Emily's attorney, a no-nonsense woman who spoke in crisp, steady sentences that left no room for argument. Evidence was presented, document after document, transaction after transaction. Forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, joint accounts drained for personal luxuries. Sabrina's name attached to Emily's marital assets under false pretenses. Each revelation hit the room like a hammer, the collective tension thickening with every word. Sabrina's shoulders shook silently as she tried to hide her sobs. Travis shifted uncomfortably, running a trembling hand through his hair as the evidence piled higher against him. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She sat perfectly still, her eyes locked on the judge, refusing to let Travis's unraveling distract her from what mattered. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for something bigger. The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. His voice was low but sharp as he delivered his ruling. Given the overwhelming evidence of fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty, the court awards full ownership of the disputed properties to Emily Carter. In addition, the defendant is ordered to pay restitution damages, including all diverted funds and legal costs. He paused, his gaze hardening as it landed on Travis. Furthermore, the court requires a formal, public apology to the plaintiff for emotional, financial, and reputational damages caused by the defendant's actions. The flash of cameras exploded in the back of the room. Reporters leaned forward, eagerly, pens scratching across notepads. The judge turned to Emily. "Miss Carter, do you wish to make a statement?" Emily rose slowly, smoothing her skirt with one hand. She stepped forward, facing Travis across the courtroom. Her voice was steady, carrying clearly without needing to shout. "This isn't revenge," she said, her words cutting through the heavy silence. "It's justice. For my child. For the life we deserve to build without fear, without shame." Travis dropped his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Sabrina buried her face in her hands. The thin facade they had clung to crumbling completely in front of the cameras and strangers. Emily didn't stay for the apology. She didn't need to hear Travis's mumbled, hollow words to know she had already reclaimed more than what they tried to take. She had reclaimed herself. As she walked toward the courtroom exit, the doors swung open and chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward her. Questions blurred together. "How do you feel? What's next? For you and your child? Do you forgive them?" Emily kept walking, a small private smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. The life ahead of her was already speaking louder than any words could. Behind her, Sabrina was escorted out by security, her designer heels slipping slightly against the polished floor. Her tears streaked her makeup. The picture of a woman who had gambled everything and lost it all in the harshest light possible. Travis followed, dragging his feet, his head bowed low, the once confident swagger gone completely. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the courthouse steps in gold. Mrs. Alden stood near the bottom, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, waiting patiently. Emily spotted her immediately, and their eyes met across the crowd. No words passed between them. None were needed. Emily descended the steps, the voices of the reporters fading behind her. Each step was lighter than the last, each breath deeper, freer. When she reached Mrs. Alden, the old woman simply squeezed her hand once, a firm, proud gesture. Together, they walked away from the courthouse, leaving behind the ruins of everything. Travis and Sabrina had tried to build on stolen ground. Emily's future was no longer something she had to fight for. It was something she had earned, piece by painful piece. And this time, no one could take it from her. The spring air was warm, soft sunlight spilling over the sidewalks as a new banner fluttered proudly across the front of the downtown mini-mall. The letters were bold and clear. "Welcome to the Haven, a center for single mothers." Balloons bobbed gently in the breeze, tied to folding chairs where families gathered, their laughter echoing down the street. Standing near the entrance, Emily shifted her newborn gently in her arms, adjusting the tiny hat that had slipped down over his forehead. His small hand clutched at the fabric of her dress, and she smiled down at him, her heart so full it felt almost too big for her chest. Mrs. Alden stood beside her, wearing a simple blue dress and a cardigan, scissors in hand. For the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her face was lit with quiet pride, her usual reserved demeanor softened by the emotion of the day. Around them, old neighbors who once whispered behind closed doors now clapped and smiled openly, many stepping forward to offer handshakes and congratulations without a trace of the judgment they had once so freely given. Emily looked over the crowd, her eyes lingering on familiar faces. The grocery store manager who had once told her to take her drama outside, now standing sheepishly. In the back, a bouquet of flowers in hand. The young waitress from the diner who had once offered her free coffee, now beaming brightly as she waved. People she had thought would never see her as anything but broken were now here, celebrating her strength. Mrs. Alden squeezed her elbow, gently, pulling her from her thoughts. Emily gave a small nod, and together they raised the oversized scissors, cutting through the red ribbon in one clean, satisfying snip. Applause burst out instantly, cameras flashing, children laughing, and Emily's heart soaring higher than it had in months. She shifted the baby in her arms, pressing a kiss to his soft hair as they stepped forward into the center that was no longer just hers. It belonged to every woman who had been told she wasn't enough. Inside, the center was bright and welcoming. There were play areas for children, small offices for counseling and financial guidance, shelves lined with donated clothes and supplies. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables with information pamphlets, offering coffee and pastries to guests. It wasn't just a building. It was a lifeline, a promise that no one else would have to walk through what she had alone. As she walked through the front doors, a small commotion outside caught her attention. Across the street, just beyond the laughter and celebration, Travis stood under the faded awning of a rundown used car dealership. His once expensive suit was now stained and ill-fitting, his hair thinning at the edges. He hunched over a bucket of soapy water, scrubbing the rims of a battered sedan, while the manager barked orders at him from the doorway. No one paid him any attention. The crowds that once cheered for him, the friends who once toasted him, had long since moved on. He was invisible now, a shadow of the man who had once thought he could throw Emily away without consequence. A few storefronts down, Sabrina's former boutique stood dark and empty. The windows were cracked, the door chained shut, spray-painted. Across the once pristine sign were angry slashes of graffiti, the bold letters of her name barely visible beneath layers of paint. Passers-by didn't even glance at it anymore. It was just another forgotten ruin in a city that had no patience for those who tried and failed to steal someone else's dream. Emily turned her back on it all, focusing instead on the life unfolding around her. She moved through the center, accepting hugs and congratulations, her heart steady, her mind clear. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She had simply built something better, stronger, and entirely her own. As the sun dipped lower, in the sky casting long shadows across the sidewalk, Emily stepped outside once more. The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft, contented sigh. She cradled him closer, her gaze sweeping over the crowd that had gathered. Neighbors, volunteers, old friends, new beginnings. A soft breeze lifted the ends of her hair, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of everything she had survived. The nights spent crying on diner tables, the humiliations, the betrayals, the cold hospital rooms, the courtroom battles. They were all part of the story. But they were not the end. They had been the forging ground. Her voice, warm and steady, floated softly above the sounds of the gathering. They locked her out thinking they'd stolen her life, but she built a new one stronger than ever before. The words weren't for the cameras. They weren't for the crowd. They were for herself, and for the tiny life sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the battles already fought on his behalf. As twilight settled over the city, Emily lifted her head high, the lights of the haven glowing behind her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new unknowns, but she wasn't afraid anymore. And somewhere across the city, in places where the lights had already dimmed and the doors had closed, the echoes of what she had built tonight would carry forward, stronger than betrayal, louder than humiliation, brighter than anything Travis and Sabrina had ever tried to take away. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more emotional journeys like Emily's.